with that, we're going to our next conversation. Our host for our next fireside chat is Niko Bonatsos, and he is a managing director at General Catalyst, a venture capital firm with around $7.5 billion raised across 10 funds over the last 20 years. He's been instrumental in investments such as Snap, that I'm sure you're all familiar with, Hive, and Remote.com. He has attended Stanford University as a Fulbright scholar and earned his MS in Management Science and Engineering. And in his conversation with Kevin Gu from Hive, he will explore building and selling enterprise AI. Please welcome Niko and Kevin.
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Kevin. How are you doing?
Hey, Niko. Good. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. It's been some time. I think it's been a week or so since we last chatted. So why don't you go about introducing yourself? Who are you and what does Hive do?
Yeah. So we've been around, total for about 6.5 years. Company went through a pretty significant pivot to focus on enterprise AI about 3.5 years ago. Today, we're about 200 full-time employees. We're based here in San Francisco. We raised about 50 million capital, and we made some pretty strong progress the past few years, especially in what I believe to be the first truly practical use cases of enterprise AI across a wide range of verticals. And this space is really interesting. It's been one that you, of course, knows from the early days. It was a lot of interesting science, but very little commercial applications. So we had to figure out, like many other companies, what it means to sell something that's totally brand new. But yeah, it's been it's been an exciting few years for us so far, and I still think we're at the early parts of the journey. But there's a lot of signs now, not just from us, but from some other companies as well, that there is real potential to sell things that work now.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about like some happy customer stories?
Sure. Yeah. So just quick overview about what it is that we actually do here at Hive. There's two parts to the business. How we build machine learning models is really focused on a kind of subset called deep learning, which means we're trying to train models that can kind of think like humans. Now, to do this, we need to build vast amounts of training data to actually show the machine enough examples to interpret different edge cases and different scenarios, much like a human would. For instance, if you're trying to teach a kid how to recognize, animals like cats and dogs, what you're going to do first is really show them examples of cats and examples of dogs, and from there they'll learn how to actually think about those. And so we believed in this wholeheartedly in the beginning, that in order to actually build good models, we really need really good training data to kind of be that foundational layer. Is why we're called Hive. So in the very beginning, we built up this distributed workforce that today is one of the largest in the world. We have about 2 million people all over the world that actually help us generate our training data. We pay them real money to do these tasks. So it could be drawing bounding boxes around objects, categorizing images and scenes, looking at text and interpreting semantic meaning, really whatever we want. First happens on Hive. Today, we annotated and aggregate something around 4 billion pieces of data. It's pretty staggering. And all that data flows into models that we then serve to our customers. And so if you think about the type of problems we've solved, we really divide into a few broad verticals. So right now, we focus primarily on what I call the digital space. And within the digital space, there's a lot of different applications. Our oldest and most kind of well-known set has been in the space of content moderation. So this is one where you can imagine a very repetitive, slightly painful human task of looking through vast amounts of user-generated content and try to understand if there's anything that's inappropriate, right? So if there's any nudity, violence, drugs, hate speech, things like that. Because from all your work with consumer companies that this is something that is pretty prevalent across the industry. Everyone deals with this in different ways. It's gonna be very painful. We decided that building this as an initial model would be a good proof point of, one, is it possible to actually get something again that really works in automated fashion really well, and then solve a core problem and kind of expand from there. And that's really what we did. So content moderation for us, it's been our first major product. We have about 40 different customers today. Many of the largest consumer platforms in the world rely on us pretty exclusively to handle all their content in an automated fashion. So we will take in all types of inputs: image, video, text, audio. We're doing billions of these pieces of content every month now in kind of automated processing. They take that information, they use it to then understand, if something's bad, ban the user. If something's good, potentially even like they can know that these users never do anything bad, and they can then put them into different parts of the ecosystem. One kind of amusing adage I can give is, this is maybe not the biggest customer, but it's one that's pretty well known, is the website Chat Roulette. This, of course, got very famous back in the day for being one of the first like really viral video apps back in, I think it was 2009, actually. It's pretty crazy. And these guys, of course, were also well known for having a lot of nudity issues on the platform. And it turns out Chat Roulette is actually still around, still kicking well, growing nicely, actually. And recently, they've actually used us, and it's been fully moderated now. So if you go on Chat Roulette, there's no more nudity. It's kind of what it's known for is no longer a problem, and they attribute that to us completely, which is a really cool case study for this. But yeah, aside from things like content moderation, we do a lot of what I would call general vision tasks. So things like logo detection, OCR, speech to text, audio transcription as well. I think on a high level, a lot of people would consider us to be pretty directly competitive with the big public cloud. So Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all of their kind of machine learning services. We have very comparable solutions as well.
Awesome. So thank you for this overview. Building enterprise AI products, as you know, can have a much higher barrier to entry due to the technical difficulty. And there's a fair amount of time required to make a product that are usable and adapt to internal workflows of enterprises. Mm-hmm. What would be some quick tips you would have for founders and product builders in this category?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this is something that's pretty important to touch on as well. When you think about AI versus other technology trends over the last few decades, I think it is unique on a few levels, right? So, imagine you have a room of 20 people, some technical, some non-technical, but all with reasonable education background, all of reasonable intelligence. If we were to give everyone, 6 months to build, like, for instance, like a mobile app, we could all go to boot camps online, learn it. Maybe some looks better, some will work faster, but ultimately they're all going to be within probably 10 to 20% of each other functionality. It's going to work, right? Now, if you were to do the same experiment with, same 20 people, but not have them build AI models, this is where the variance becomes dramatic. It's possible that everyone's models will work well, but the truth is, I think the best person's model could be 1,000 times better than the worst, right? And this is something that I don't think many people appreciate. This is the opposite of commoditized space, in that it's extremely difficult to kind of even get working initially, but then where it can go, how well the models can perform, there's almost no ceiling, because the truth is nothing's ever perfect. It's not deterministic, it's probabilistic, as I like to say, which means that there is never really a finished state. You can keep making the model better and better. And so I actually almost view AI as a sort of binary thing, which is it's either you can kind of get it working, for instance, in the sense of, like, if I have a model that can predict cats and dogs and predicts cats 10% of the time, it technically works. It is predicting cats sometimes, but no one in the right mind would actually use the model because it's not accurate enough. I think that's something that's really important about AI models. And I think many people need to realize this is until it's getting to the point where it's actually really good, in my mind, it's generally that mark is close, if not better than humans, is kind of that mark. Unfortunately, it's not really usable. You can't really sell it. Like, no matter how cheap you make that model, we've seen this before, some of these other providers will even be giving their models away for free just to try and get customer usage. But models don't work. Free doesn't even cut it, because it's just not going to be useful. The error rate's too high. Unless I'm a customer and I look at this model and half the time it's the wrong answer, I'm going to go ahead and just use my humans anyways, because I don't really care about the money so much as I care about the intent and the use case of the model, which is, of course, core of my business. And so I think that's where there's just an innate barrier that is unique to AI models. And a lot of companies don't go into it with that understanding. They think it's the same thing as enterprise SaaS typically, which is more akin to that consumer model I just mentioned, which is build a product, get a POC quickly, get to market and iterate. You can't really do that in AI because there's no initial MVP that's even useful, which makes this whole space really different from traditional go-to-market strategies.
Totally. And as we all know, this is still a fairly novel space, albeit quite hyped. And now even more traditional enterprise companies, incumbents in boring industries with pretty legacy tech stacks are starting finally to realize that AI is going to become an important part of the business. Mm-hmm. How have you gone about educating them, getting in front of them? Like, talk a little bit about the marketing and sales challenge that you're facing as you're talking to such customers.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of tied with the technical uniqueness of these AI models as well. I think the standard sales model does not necessarily always work, just because a lot of it is about education, right? So you can't just spin up a very large sales team and kind of go out to market and quickly dominate. I think a lot of it is speaking to key stakeholders, usually pretty high levels, CIOs, CTO kind of folks, because these are, again, products that are not, for the most part, they're fundamental to a business operation, and they can be quite large in dollar sizes. So this is pretty much the definition of what people would call like enterprise sales, right? So a lot of our early days was me personally going and talking to these key companies and these key stakeholders of each of these companies, and educating about what it is we do. There's been a lot of, I would say, there's an interesting thing about the graphs of how a product evolution goes. I think we're in what we call the trough of disillusionment now, right? After the hype cycle goes up, and then people kind of realize that actually the stuff wasn't as good as I thought. There's been a lot of promises made over the last few years. And a lot of these buyers have had bad experiences with these type of quote unquote AI solutions. And so a lot of it is now repairing the damage done by other folks, nothing to do with us, but it's just, this is the state of the market we're in, and kind of trying to convince them, give this whole concept another chance. Because if you really look around, you ask enterprise companies today what they really think of AI, the general sentiment is still not very positive. It's one of, oh, it's interesting, but we've tried it, kind of failed. I'm going to stick with the tried and true. So you look at some of these larger, even social companies like Facebook, Twitter, this is well known. They're still mostly relying on human moderators as an example, just because they've tried this other stuff and the backlash was too great when they messed up. So they said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to stick with whatever I've done before, even if it's inefficient. It's not worth the risk to my business of trying to move to this unproven technology. And so that mindset is still there across pretty much every account that we've worked with and every partner that we've worked with. And so having to convince them of this is really important. I think this is where the enterprise sales process for us is a lot more in the early days. It's less about the commercial sale and all that. It's really just about understanding their concerns, what they tried in the past, and how what we've done here is pretty different, and how we can, hopefully earn the right to even get another shot. But, for us, it's been less, I would say, on vast numbers of headcount here at the company doing sales, and really more focused on just product quality. And then once that works, the word of mouth of that for people to say, oh, actually, Hive isn't like these others. There are companies like Hive that have proven themselves in that their technology is not just based on hype. It actually does work. There's a track record behind it. And then that helps, assuage a lot of concerns. So when we go into a meeting and they've actually already heard about us, and they've seen that, oh, okay, my friends, my colleagues, other companies have had this work, it's a much easier conversation for us to have.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. If you were to get started today selling Hive's products, what advice would you give to yourself from a couple of years ago when it comes to sales?
Yeah, I think kind of ties back a little bit to the previous one, which is, I was actually also under the mindset of the traditional MVP model, get something built quickly, get to market, see what customer feedback is, and try to iterate from there. And I admittedly may have tried too broadly to sell a number of things. I think in the early days, it was, I looked at something like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, I saw all the solutions that they had, and I thought to myself, first thing I need to do is I need to build all the things they have to get to parity, right? Because I want to be just like these big public clouds, and I want to have all these offerings. I had 6 different models, and I had a bunch of interested beta users trying it out. And then one by one, I saw them after they tried, they said, well, this is cool. And it's slightly better than these public clouds, admittedly, but the thing is, these aren't good enough either. So what are we going to do with this? And I went with that feedback. That was really important. As you recall, Niko, we had many conversations about focus and trying to really do a few things really well. And that I think was the big impetus for us, which is, even though our company is actually unique in that we can build a lot of models, we have an extraordinary amount of trained data from our Hive workforce that gives us, I think, a really unfair competitive edge. Even with that, it's still very difficult for any one company to try to build everything at once in the beginning, especially in a space like AI, where again, the barrier for it to be useful is so high. So I think that decision to focus on a few things, for instance, like content moderation, logo detection, just really get things that maybe weren't the most glamorous, but actually had a very fast path towards commercialization. There's a really strong user base there that could take this and immediately replace an existing major cost center and pain point. That was critical for us. And I would say that for any company that's thinking about building enterprise AI, it really goes back to that, which is focus on perhaps 1 or 2 things at most that you can do really, really well, and just invest heavily into it and really invest more than you might even think is necessary for it to be useful. Because again, even if you got these initial users, we even got some beta users early day with our old model, and it showed some promise, but that retention just really wasn't there. You could see that the usage within the org was minimal just because the model wasn't that impressive, right? I think for us, once we started focusing back on just, forget the sales aspect and those optics of feeling like we're making a lot of progress, we're doing a lot of commercial deals, but really understanding, does our product work really well? How are our initial users actually viewing it? What's the feedback like, right? For me, I would talk to every customer and say, what do you honestly think about this model? Not just how it compares against the other competitors, quote unquote, but really like for you yourself, in the long run, do you think this is going to replace your old way of doing things? And as I started hearing that, every single client was basically saying, look, this is actually working. It's not only really good, it's much better than I expected. And it can in fact be better performing than our human models. That's really when the light bulb clicked for me. And I said, oh, wow, like maybe now it's finally possible. And then from there, all the sales became a lot easier too. So I think there's this virtuous cycle of the product works well and the sales start to come too. And so I think it's really product led more than anything else in this space, which I think is a little, that was not intuitive for me, at least just seeing how all these other companies have been built over the years.
Kevin, thank you for the answer and thank you for going back to memory lane. I liked some of the snappy advice that you gave. You sound like one of those, Twitter VCs out there who give a lot of free advice that probably is not worth much. So with that, this is a wrap for our fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Niko. That was fantastic. So I hope a lot of our audience can engage with you, also post that and ask follow-up questions that they have. But thank you very much for joining us here virtually at Techsylvania. Thank you both.
Appreciate the invite. Bye.
Having me.